Hello friends, and welcome to the program. You know, in 1988, I remember watching the PBS documentary, Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth. The documentary was originally broadcast as 6 one-hour conversations between mythologist Joseph Campbell and journalist Bill Moyers during the final 2 summers of Campbell's life. In these discussions, Campbell presents his ideas about comparative mythology and the ongoing role of myth in human society. These talks included excerpts from Campbell's seminal work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Now, that documentary certainly changed my life, and I think the lives of thousands of people who were searching for a new way of being religious, a more contemporary and multicultural understanding of God. Metaphors of the divine life which would not only preserve the beauty and the wisdom of their mythic origins, but could also be held in harmony with the notions and the metaphors coming out of contemporary cosmology. You know, Joseph Campbell was fond of saying that if you want to change the world, you have to change the metaphor. And that's precisely what he helped so many of us achieve. He gave us new insights into the nature of religious consciousness, and he helped us to understand the poetic and the metaphoric nature of religious myths and symbols. On the 25th anniversary of the documentary, Bill Moyers shared these reflections on his friend Joseph Campbell. Moyers said, "At a time when millions of people were yearning for a way of talking about religious experience without regard to a rigid belief system, Campbell gave them a language for it. He said that myths were clues to our spiritual nature and that they could help us be guides to find a sacred space within us where we might unlock the creative powers of our deeper self." I find the same creative spirituality alive and well in the works of John Knight Lundwall. I first discovered John's novel interpretation of mythology by watching his many riveting videos on YouTube, and not long ago discovered that he had written an absorbing and engaging new book on the nature of mythic consciousness called Mythos and Cosmos, Mind and Meaning in the Oral Age. Recently, he was kind enough to join us in our studios here on the coast of Northern California, where we had the following conversation. Well, John, at the end of chapter 2, you make this distinction between a vertical and horizontal memory. You say that writing allows for what could be called a vertical memory, but oral cultures rely on a horizontal memory. I was wondering if you could help us explain what you mean there.
Right. So, look, in order to create an iPhone, you need a lot of information. You need to know about electricity, information processing, microchips, materials, of which all these things are made. All these things require layers of information that accrue over decades and centuries, right? And how do you keep all that knowledge accruing and building on each other? Well, the only way you can do that is through print. And not only is it through print, but you also need a printing press. You need a permanent way to fix writing that's easily available and that you can build on. So the invention of writing changes many things, but the printing press, the Gutenberg press, 15th century, it's actually not the first press. The Chinese invented the first printing press, but the problem with the Chinese printing press was the Chinese alphabet. The Chinese alphabet has thousands of characters, right? And so even with a printing press, you're still very limited with the amount of information you can build because it takes a lifetime for someone to learn the thousands of characters to become fully literate in Chinese writing. Well, this is where the Greeks had a great advantage. Their alphabet was less than 30 letters and they had vowel sign representations. They were the first culture that had a fully reductive alphabet that can produce any combinations of letters to create ideas and words. And then when you add a printing press that is printing English or Latin alphabets, also less than 30 letters, you can now mass produce thousands of books really quick. And this changes everything. And then over years, you're reading books, you're comparing and contrasting different theories. I mean, the whole scientific revolution was predicated on the printing press. But it is argued that without the printing press, that could not have happened. The scientific revolution could not have happened. Copernicus develops his theory of heliocentrism, all the planets orbiting the sun instead of the cosmos orbiting the earth. He develops that theory by relying heavily on texts that he is searching throughout all of Europe as he's doing his travels, trying to build an edifice of sources to, we're taught that he developed that theory using astronomical observations. Actually, he had his theory before his observations. His observations were used to try to prove his theory. So one has to ask, where did he get his theory from? And it was from ancient texts. So to build an iPhone, you need a printing press and you need writing. Without those two things, you will never get an iPhone, ever. So a literate culture has the capacity for modern technology. An oral culture does not, period. An oral culture cannot build 1,000 vertical layers of information. Using orality alone, it's actually amazing how many vertical layers of information you can create because they had incredible memory systems.
Then, John, what is it then in an oral culture that functions as a printing press, so to speak, in a literate culture?
Oh, that's a very good question. So my answer to that, aside from horizontal and vertical memory, the printing press of an oral society, and of course I'm using a literate metaphor to describe an oral category, so it's very sloppy. But alas, we're literate people, and so maybe it's the only metaphor I can use. The printing press of an oral people is really their myth. Myth is the oral imprinting press of pre-literate peoples, right? Imprinting meaning how they organize their memories, their mnemonic strategies. And it goes beyond that. If myth is the press, ritual is the ink of that press. It is the thing that congeals, that oral peoples repeatedly do to reinforce the stories. It's very interesting that when Herodotus, the Greek historian, cites a myth, a Greek myth, it's always in relation to a sacred site where rituals were performed. So myths are very often wed to rituals because they belong to the same printing press, right, of oral people.
So the religious cult was really the place where the myths were actually acted out. I think you used this word as memory theater, right? So the religious cult was actually the memory theater in which the story, the mythic story, wasn't only told, but it was acted out in drama and dance and theater. People wore a mask. There were, like we know to a day, Greek choruses. There was choruses, and this was a real community event, right?
Right.
And part of your argument is that then it was in this way, in this memory theater of the community, in which the oral cosmology was actually transmitted to the people. And part of our own misunderstanding of myth then in a literate age is that once the story, the story of the mythic story could be written down, then it started to have a life of its own, and it lost the context of its meaning in this memory theater of the occult then.
That is correct. Sadly, myth is a dead language. It is a language that ultimately is irretrievable because myth originally was an integral part of the memory theater, which was the religious cult. And I actually won't even use the word religious because there is no word for religion in any ancient language. That is our imposition. Oh, look at them, they're doing their dances and they're doing their shouts. That's just a bunch of religious bugaboo. There is no word for religion in Egyptian or Mesopotamian or Greek. And if there's no word for a thing, there's no concept of it. So their memory theater is a large complex of the, what I call the cult, right? So the people in charge, in tribes, it's the shaman who's in charge of the cult. In civilizations, it's the temple priesthood or priestesses who are in charge of the cult. And they oversee the festivals, they retell the myths, they measure the stars. It's all a synthetic whole, but it's not separate. There's no difference between church and state because the state is a copy of the cosmos. The king reenacts what the cosmos is doing. The priests are doing the same thing. The festivals are doing the same thing. It's all a synthetic whole. And so what we miss is that it looks so bizarre to us, to these ancient peoples doing their dances and telling their myths. And we forget that, the Great Pyramid in Egypt was built out of a memory theater. Right? So we have a few texts, and it's interesting that actually after the invention of writing, all the old structures start to get built in grandiose proportions, right? So after writing, we start to get these huge ziggurats in Mesopotamia and pyramids in Egypt. Stonehenge is refashioned from a wooden structure to a big megalithic stone structure. It suggests that writing actually helps the process of building these structures. Having said that, for over 1,000 years, even with writing, people were still using oral strategies. And we have a few texts where they tell us how the Egyptians built a temple or a pyramid. A certain god would come and he would carry his book. There would be some chants and there'd be some dances. And so modern scientists look at that and, those silly religious people. But it's with those chants and dances that things like the Great Pyramid appear out of the sand. Right? So interesting information can be carried in the memory theater of an oral society, including technical information, right? The actual measurement of the stars, the calendar of the society, even harmonic ratios, geometric ratios, which are all embedded in Egyptian architecture and Mesopotamian architecture. So this memory theater is central to an oral society. And on this point, all oral peoples create polytheistic pantheons. All of them. Polytheism, the belief in many different gods, is a direct consequence from oral cognition. Right? In order to memorize different functions in nature, you have to assign different functions and geographies and stars a different identity. And these are divided into male and female rationales. The sun inseminates, and so it's generally a male god. The moon goes through its phases, which reflects the
characters in the cosmic drama. So to say.
Characters in the cosmic drama.
The river was a character in the cosmic drama. The ancient grove was a character in this cosmic drama that was being told time and time again, and it's such a provocative idea because you point out that with this this cosmic play that's going on, right? It's reenacted. So the myth is part of the play, the ritual reenactment is part of the play, plus the temple is like the theater, right?
Right.
In which this play is going on. The people are there watching the play going on, right? And the temple is at the center of is at the center of the city, and then the city itself, the architecture of the city is actually laid out to mirror it's a cosmic archetypes. So it's just this beautiful, isn't it? This beautiful notion of a cosmovision that is expressed everywhere in everything, that permeates all of life. And do you think maybe that's one reason why not only why they didn't have a word for religion? I know certain Native American tribes also don't have a word for religion. And would you say that's because everything was religion?
Well,
There was this huge cosmovision that was being enacted, and so there was no way to get out of the meaning of the vision, so to speak. And that really the whole idea of religion arises with this abstraction that literacy brings.
that is correct. Shockingly, religion is a category of literacy. Actually, religion, as we understand it, is a modern fabrication that arose sympathetically with secularism. And secularism often pejoratively talks about religion to demarcate itself from what it is, its claim to the ultimate truth, right? But the truth of the matter is, the psyche is religious. This is a point Carl Jung makes in his essay, The Psyche and Religion, or Religion and the Psyche, that every human being creates meaning from his or her environment. And largely, it's a metaphysical affair. It's largely a philosophical affair as to how we're going to place ourselves in this cosmic drama. And I mean, even Karl Popper, the German historian of science, says, look, my fellow scientists, modern cosmology is metaphysics. It is a philosophy. There are lots of people that do not like that because we have this idea that now there's this great scene in Nacho Libre where Steve says, I don't believe in God, I believe in science, right? Yeah. And because God and religion is pejoratively categorized. But as it turns out, in our cosmologies, secular or other, they are religious visions. They are theological, philosophical visions. We can talk about that a little later, but they are, what we've done is basically we've replaced the Pope's mitre with the sequined lab coat, and we call it reason. But much of our modern cosmology is rooted in as much faith, and not only faith, but blind faith in our scientific notions as the ancient ideas of the cosmos. So ancient oral peoples create polytheistic systems, and they don't have a word for religion. What they're doing is reenacting, they're trying to repeat the cosmogony. They're trying to reenact every function of the cosmos they see, because by reenacting it, they believe they are living in accordance to the cosmic law, to the cosmic order. This is the proper way to live.
Living in harmony.
Living in harmony.
Living in harmony.
That's right.
With the nature.
And so everything they do, whether it's part of the city, part of the government, part of the temple cult, part of measuring the stars, the astronomy, the math, the markets.
Or their morality as well.
Morality,
right?
their ethics, right, is all connected into that. And and they themselves would not separate these different categories that I've just mentioned. They all belong to the cosmic drama.
Yeah. So in this sense, we could say for oral people, for the original myth makers, religion was ontologically grounded. Life was religious. And it's the great Alfred North Whitehead said, metaphysical propositions never lack exemplification. And what he meant by that was that that which everything has in common, right? The metaphysical, the ontological grounding of our life is what we have in common with everything else, right? And that's always exemplified, right? That's always exemplified in life, and that's the very thing that we can't see, right? Because it's always exemplified.
Well,
these are really, really fascinating and very provocative notions. But let me ask you a question here. You've talked about a little bit about what cosmology means in contemporary society. You say that we've sort of deified science, and so that the scientist has become the new priest of the age, right? And but you're saying part of the problem with the deification of science is that we have put these blinders on ourselves because of our own intellectual, the bigotry in a sense, of our own intellectual presuppositions, that we think that we cannot derive knowledge from these myths anymore. We cannot derive knowledge from looking at the ways and the meaning structures of oral societies. And so we have to limit ourselves then to this very contemporary, very limited, very short-sighted understanding of epistemology, as you put it, right? So the only way to know something now is not because you have an intimate relationship with it, right? Not because your whole life is lived out in this great cosmovision, right? That you're trying to, you not only experience this harmony of the universe, but your whole life is lived in accordance with trying to put yourself in harmony, right?
Right.
With this great cosmovision, right? But modern science isn't concerned about that whatsoever.
No, oral people.
Modern science is divorced from morality in that sense. It's abstracted from it, right?
Oral peoples live in nature. Mm-hmm. Literate peoples use it, right? And science. Look, I'm not criticizing science. I love science, right? I flew in a plane here because of science. It's just that there are ups and downs to every culture and way we process information. And we have a blind faith in a scientific worldview. Well, look, science can create an atom bomb, but it doesn't tell you what to do with it, right? We are still entirely dependent on an ethical, moral, philosophical framework as to what to do with what science creates. And we often don't make that distinction, right? I don't need religion, I don't need theology, I don't need the church, and because I have science. Mm-hmm. Well, once you have the atom bomb, now what? Right? Now, and it's true, violence is often done in the name of religion, theology, and church. That is absolutely true. But it's also true it's absolutely done in the name of science, right? In the 20th century, we had 200 million people slaughtered, not from religious justifications, but from scientific ones.
Well, and it's very, very fascinating. In Native American culture, Native Americans never went to war over religious principles. Isn't that fascinating, right? Oh. So you would say that, and you often make this point in your book, that originally, that actually science, as well as the arts, derived from the oral cult. So there was no problem there was no dichotomy between religion and science. That's a very modern notion. That's a very modern principle, isn't it? I was wondering if you could comment upon that.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is it is a modern fabrication. That science is something separated from all other epistemologies. Science is simply, modern science is simply a methodology to acquire information. That's all science is. And we often treat it as if science is a cosmology, ontology. No, cosmology and ontology are not science. Science lives in that. These are big words, but basically science is always the servant to some philosophy. And so before you go out and use your science, you should examine what philosophy you're using. Because whether you live in a secular or religious culture, in the end, you can still find virtue and balance, or you can still find the Holocaust. Both roads can lead to the same place, depending on what your philosophy is.
So you see science as being simply you aren't denigrating it, but you're saying that science is a particular methodology within a much larger cosmology then, with the idea being that science is not objective in the way that so many scientists would want to believe that it is, because science, scientific theory is itself based upon tacit presupposition that's informing it from a cultural, cosmological point of view then.
That is correct. Objective science is math. And once you step out of that, things start getting fuzzy. I mean, you can't even say objective science is physics, because then you start entering the realm of quantum physics, and all of a sudden it's a wide field of theory that is all we have. Now, let me just back step in for a second and just point out, I don't mean to romanticize the past either, which is what the Romantics do. Ancient world peoples were connected to nature and the cosmos in significantly. Everything was connected to it. Consequences, but it too could find expressions in extreme violence and in horrific outcomes. I mean, I think of when the conquistadors came, and of course they wiped out the native population through war and disease. But when they came, they found an Aztec empire that was sacrificing thousands of people every year on the altars of the temple. And they weren't doing this, well, I don't know exactly all the reasons, but there was a huge cosmology behind these ritual sacrifices. They had developed this idea that their creator God sacrificed himself in order to create the sun, which created the world, and therefore we're going to repeat this process to bring divine harmony down. So now we're going to sacrifice human beings to copy this. And if it just so happens to be our political adversary or our economic partner that needs to be needs to be eliminated, then it's all of a sudden cosmology is very advantageous. So when we look in the ancient world, we also find exaggerations of violence and horror, and this is what we learn: that in every age, there is an apex of reason and a fall. In every age, there is the spiritual, the quest for the right, the true, the good, the beautiful. And there's the mob in every age. Orality and modernity are not different in that regard, nor will the future be in every age.
modern cosmology has been basically reduced to science and the instruments of science, the logic, the rationality of the scientific method. Right? So that when modern science looks at the microcosm, right, it sees rocks in motion, right?
Right.
Rocks in motion. And when it looks at the microcosm, it looks down a microscope. When it looks at the macrocosm, it looks up a telescope, right?
Right.
If this is what modern science has been reduced to, what is cosmology then in an oral culture? How is it different? How does it function?
Well,
because this is really, I think, at the heart of your work, and is really some of your most creative ideas are in when you try to explain what oral cosmology is about.
It is a very central piece of my work, and I have to tell you, when I started studying religions and myths, and I find these interesting cosmic themes and motifs, pretty soon you build this huge strata of motifs. You don't know what to do with it. None of the scholarly literature really is doing much with it. And so it's something I had to wrestle with. So let's start at some real basics. Cosmology is a big word. Cosmology is the study of the universe. And a modern definition of cosmology is it's our study of the origin and structure of the universe. And so here's the problem with that definition. All cosmologies are philosophies. All of them. All of them are, another big word, epistemologies. Epistemology is a word that means how do we know what we know? Well, it turns out what we think of the universe is how we frame our cultural imagination. The most important story, the most important narrative you could ever tell a person is a cosmology. Because a cosmology will tell a person where they fit in the universe, where they fit in the big picture. And if your cosmology is rocks in motion and dirt, then where do I fit? The tension between the creationists, right, who are arguing, hey, we should be teaching the Bible in school, and between the secularists that say, no, we need to be teaching science, is really a tension not between science and religion. It's an argument of cosmologies. This group here still wants to find a valuable place in the cosmos. And they start that with the creation, with the cosmology, where the universe came from. It came from God. We cannot give that up. If we give that up, we are no longer an essential part of the cosmos. Well, actually, it turns out that these tensions have existed for centuries. When the Greeks were first articulating a geocentric cosmos, which was completely wrong, by the way, but when they were first articulating a geocentric cosmos, one Roman emperor said, well, this is very interesting, but I prefer to believe in the cosmos of the mysteries. And that cosmos was a cosmos where the human soul took center stage. So even back in classical Greece, we get this tension between competing cosmologies, between the science of the age, which at the time was geocentrism, and the mystery cults that taught that the human soul, the human psyche, was intimately connected with all cosmic functions. So look, cosmology is our understanding of the structure of the universe and our place in the universe. One thing it's nice to know, and again, Karl Popper points this out, all cosmologies are metaphysical. They're all philosophies of some sort. So we have Big Bang cosmology in our modern world. And lots of people are not going to be happy or agree with what I'm about to say, but the truth of the matter is the Big Bang cosmology, with all the other ones in the past and the ones that will be in the future, is a theory that begins in mid-sentence, right? It works after the singularity, where all the matter in the universe is supposed to be in this one particle, this one singularity. Once that's there, then there's this expansion, this explosion, and the universe is formed from it. Well, our theories begin to apply after the expansion starts, right? It doesn't say anything about the original singularity. That is a construct of pure faith. We can't prove it, we can't disprove it. We don't know where it came from, we don't know what it is, we don't know anything about it. And again, we can't even prove that it was there. We infer it was there because everything is expanding, and therefore we assume that everything must have been in one particle. But this is philosophy. This is metaphysics. This is something we can't disprove or prove. So again, I'm not denigrating it. I love studying scientific cosmology, modern cosmology. It's one of my passions. And astronomy, I'm an amateur astronomer. I love going out using my GPS telescope and looking at the stars. But it's important to know that modern cosmology is a philosophy, and one good way of comparing it to ancient oral cosmology is by talking about this idea of a macrocosm, microcosm. The macrocosm is the big space, right? Stars, sun, moon. The microcosm in modern science is actually the quantum particles, but in oral science, the microcosm was the human soul, which was a reflection of the bigger cycles around him or her. So we have this idea that in ancient oral societies, they were so simple-minded that they created this geocentric universe, right? Because you walk out, you stand on the ground, you look at the horizon, everything is, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and it goes around, and the stars are moving, and it's all around the earth, and therefore, the universe must be geocentric. The earth's in the center, and the universe is all around it. First off, that isn't oral cosmology. That's Greek cosmology. Pre-Greek cosmology is actually uncertain because it was oral. This should be rather obvious. But if it's oral, it doesn't get passed down to us. And what we do read is written centuries later by people often criticizing the oral constructs. So our view of oral cosmology is already difficult. So is that what they really believed? And I bring in several examples in my book which says the picture is much more complex. Because in oral cosmology, there is no separation between heaven and earth. The flat earth of myth actually was the extension of the celestial equator into space, measuring the solstices and equinoxes. In other words, a lot of flat earths and myths are square. Well, so we think, these childlike minds, they have this simple square notion of an earth. Well, that's actually an experiential take on the earth in space. You go out and you measure north, south, east, west, there's your square earth. But then the sun rises and sets in different spots on the horizon, and it'll rise north and stop at the summer solstice at its far north extreme, then it'll start rising south and stop at the winter solstice as its far southern extreme, and right in the middle are the days of equinox. More importantly, as it's rising on different spots on the horizon, on summer solstice, there'll be a group of stars that meet it. And on winter solstice, there'll be a different group. And at equinox, vernal and spring equinox, there'll be different groups. So they understood that as all these celestial bodies moved, there was a a synthesis of what was going on, and the flat square Earth therefore becomes the stars meeting the sun on the days of equinox and solstice, right? Or north, south, east, west. It's not a childlike, simple way of saying, well, we can't figure anything out, so the Earth is square. It's an experiential, hey, look at what the sun does. Look, it's meeting different stars. These stars are actually opposed to each other to the sky. This forms our square Earth, right? More importantly, so this is one way of putting it, modern cosmology has discovered this heliocentric system. Hey, the planets actually don't orbit the Earth, they orbit the sun. And this changed everything, right? The birth of heliocentrism was part of a scientific revolution. It transformed society. Well, we discovered the heliocentric system of the macrocosm, the big space. We turned the microcosm, or the role of man in the cosmos, into a geocentric system. In other words, anthropokosmos, man from the heavens, man from the star world, man who is, or woman who is destined to return to the star world, turned into anthropergamentum, man as dirt. So in oral cosmology, you have this geocentric cosmos, but the soul is heliocentric, in that it can join with the sun and stars and ascend through the heavens to arrive at the realm of the infinite, the eternal. In much of ancient cosmology, so we would call it religion, but much of ancient cosmology is this idea that the soul is eternal and it comes from the star world. And we are here to repeat, to live in harmony with the star world so that we can return to it.
Because it's such a fascinating idea, this notion of the human beings coming from the stars, because you speak of that in terms of ancient Greek and Egyptian thought, but I was adopted into a sub-tribe of the Lakota Sioux people, and I'm the firekeeper for my family's Sundance ceremony. And every Sundance, when I'm there in the middle of South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation, looking at the beautiful heavenly stars, I hear the stories that my family tells, that they originated, the Lakota people came from the stars, and that when they pass from this life, that they journey through the Milky Way back to eternal life. And that idea that's being expressed in the middle of this country, at summer solstice, in the Lakota culture, is still the same story that was told of this celestial ascent back into eternal life that's thousands and thousands of years old. It's beautiful. It is.
It's stunning.
It's a beautiful story, and you can see there the power of that. The power of those notions is because we have a place now in the world. We are related to the stars. We are related to the earth. We are related to one another. And we are all part of this. One of the primal religious notions of the Navajo people is the notion that they call Hojo. And that means a harmony, beautiful, harmony and beauty. In many of their prayers, we live in beauty, beauty behind me, beauty in front of me. That there is a beauty and a harmony that is expressed if one has eyes to see, if one truly wants to live in accordance with this way. There is a great power given to one, and that power has to do with living in the knowledge of eternal life. That we are not simply these beings of clay. You know, we can relate to our form, to our material bodies. But there is we are star beings. There is in us this consciousness that is our origin from which we came, and that when we leave this world, we shut the radio off and we return back to beauty, and we return back to the harmony of the divine light, the divine consciousness. And that's a very powerful way to live. That's a very powerful epistemology. And who is to, why can't that inform us as equally, if not more, than a modern scientific cosmology? You know, we are the ones, you're saying, that make those sort of what you call epistemological judgments about.
That is correct.
That we say, no, it's only science that's going to inform us as to the nature of reality, not the beauty of the night sky.
But the point is, science is still speculating. Science can offer only honest silence when it comes to subjects of the soul. So, oral cosmology placed the soul in the center of the cosmos. And, we can laugh and smirk at it, but you can't prove or disprove it. And in modern scientific vision, you can't prove or disprove the non-existence of the soul. So oral cosmology explained the universe to the community, and it helped them participate. There's an old Greek philosopher who says, we are eternal souls carrying around a corpse. Right? This body is just a temporary moving of rocks. But our essence is eternal, and it will return to the eternal.
I recently lost my sister, Tilly Blackbear, and I remember Tilly used to tell me, she'd say, Lynn, she says, and she was a powerful Lakota woman. She started the first battered women's shelter on a Indian reservation many 40 years ago, something like that. And my sister used to tell me, especially at the end of her life, she'd say, Lynn, we are spirits on an earthly journey. I mean, don't we feel that way sometimes? We really feel that way, right? Even in the midst of this material culture, even in the midst of, like you say, how our bishops now wear lab coats, right?
Right.
They postulate a cosmos from which we are abstracted from. We are no longer really part of this divine cosmic vision,
right,
coming out of this oral cosmology. And we really need to be reminded, as my sister reminded me, that we truly are spirits on this earthly journey. And I really thank you for writing this book. And I thank you for this heroic, really, in my opinion, this heroic endeavor that you took to look one more time as to what the nature of religion is, to look one more time as to what these ancient stories can tell us. And I really appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate you coming here to speak with us.
Thank you,
today.
Mm-hmm.